I'm going to rename the player object to player. So right click, rename, and I'm going to rename to player. Let's start working on the animation part. For that, I'm going to create a folder called animations. And inside this folder, I'm going to create another folder called player. And now open the animation tab. Select the player object and click on this little recording, little red dot. And this will create a new animation. And I want to create animation inside the player folder that I created inside the animation folder. I'm going to name this player audio animation. And after you save this, here inside the animation and player, two files got created, and one of those files is a animation controller used by Mechanim. So let's rename this. So there is no rename. So I'm gonna select and I'm gonna press the F2 key on my keyboard, and I'm gonna rename it Player Animator Controller. I want to make sure that the player idle animation is clicked, is select. And then after that, look for your sprite and then start dragging and dropping each single image to your animation tab. So I'm going to drop the first one, and then the second one, and so on. Now if you remember, we have, for the idle, we have the first four images, first four slices. So the first one has a big opening right here on the bottom, and the second one has a smaller opening and a smaller, and there's no opening here. In other words, the transition from this first slice to the last slice of the player idle slices are very smooth, but then the transition from the last one to the first one, remember this is going to be on the loop, being executed on the loop. So the transition from the last one to the first one is very big. So because of that, we're going to insert the first slice, the second slice, the third and fourth, and then we do not want this to go back to the first slide because the difference is too big. So because of that, we're going to insert the third again, and then the next one, the second one. So if you do that, then you're going to have a smoother, a better transition between the last slice and the first slice. And now all we have to do now is align these slices in an even time. So I'm doing here in slots of 5, so 0, 5, 1, 15, 20, and 15. So slices of, this guy is not aligned, slice of 0.05 seconds. So we can now test to see the movement that the player has. So I'm going to click on this small arrow here, the play arrow, and here's what you have. The next step is to create the moving animation, the walking one. So I'm going to click on this arrow here and create new clip, and still inside the animation player. Where is my animation? Texture, animation player, and I am going to name it player walking animation and save. And then I'm going to repeat the same process that I did with the player idle animation. So I'm gonna drag and drop. If you remember, the last 3 slices are the actual slices for the walking, for the moving. So I'm gonna drag and drop the first one, and then the second one, and so on. Third. And again, we do not want the transition. Remember, this is circular. We do not want the transition between the last and the first one to be not to be smooth. So because of that, we're gonna drag the second one right after the last one. So what's gonna happen here is the first one is gonna play, and then the second and the third, and then back to the second, back to the first, and so on. So the transition is a lot smoother. And again, I'm gonna align this to 0.05 seconds from each other. And you can also move each slice back and forth to make it faster or slower. And also you can change the sample rate here. It's up to you. I'm just gonna leave as it is. And then I can play my animation, so I have a little preview of what it does when it's walking. So the idle just jumps up and down, and the walking animation is leaning forward a little bit. So the animations are ready and working. So now let's work on the animator object, so Mecanim knows what to do with it. I'm also going to save my scene. So let's look for the player animator controller, and we saved in the animations player, and select this, and on the top right, let's click it open. So these are the states of our player now. So we have a idle and walking. Now we need a way to make it transition from one to the other one, and for that we're going to create a variable. So right here on the bottom left on parameters, I'm going to click on Boolean, and Boolean, if you guys remember, is a variable that has 2 values, either true or false, and I'm going to name it walking. So walking is the name of the variable. And then we're going to make a transition between idle and walking. So I'm going to right click on idle, make a transition, and then click on walking and do the same thing the other way around, make a transition and idle. If you play the game now, what you're going to see is that our little player looping through the idle and walking. So we do not want that, we want to stop that. So I'm going to click on the player idle animation, and if you notice right here on the right side there is transition. I'm going to click on that, and then on exit time the condition will be now the walking. Walking is the variable we saw earlier, right? So I'm gonna play this guy and expand again the transition, and walking is true. If I put walking goes false, now it is idle. It is actually walking. And now let's set up the actual transition. So the transition is this little arrow here, the one going from idle to walking. I'm going to click on the first one. So from idle to walking, we want if walking equals true. And the other one, going back, we want walking equals false. So let's test our transition now. I'm gonna hit the play button and notice that it's on idle position, on idle. I'm gonna go back to animator, and then I can see that the player idle is playing, and right here on the bottom left, click on this little checkbox that will make walking equals true, and then the transition has gone to walking. And if I see my game tab, I can see it's walking, and if I repeat the process again, I go back to the idle, and then I can see on the game.